Welcome to the Football Guys Dynasty Show. It's me, your favorite professional nerd. With me, as always, is our wonderful Dynasty captain, Jeff Bell. And as promised, I've brought back Herms. And a while back, we did a draft where we drafted all of our QBs. We're going to do this the boring standard way because we didn't have time. Me, Herms, and Jeff all sent in rankings into a spreadsheet. I don't know why I said sent in. And then I gave us an average and we spit them out and we put those into tiers. That's right, folks. We're talking about wide receiver tiers. So we'll jump right into it. Tier 1, the usual suspects. Justin Jefferson leads the pack. Malik Nabers, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then CeeDee Lamb finishes that off. Jeff, I became a chicken. I moved Justin Jefferson back up. I actually saw Herms have Jefferson at first. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. And we kind of talked about this on our last episode where we discussed quarterbacks. I'm ranking the Vikings QB situation into this. I know age is a factor, but Malik Nabers could be another Garrett Wilson where he's stuck in New York with at most a crazy ayahuasca fueled quarterback to bring him hope that we're hoping for. So are we crazy for having Justin Jefferson, or do you think that it's just time to put Malik Nabers ahead?
I mean, I have Malik Nabers ahead, and I think a lot of it's production based, to be honest with you. The way that he started out his career prior to picking up that injury, he was the wide receiver 1 in fantasy through 4 weeks, and the wide receiver 1 overall the first 4 games of his entire career. I mean, to me, I like that in my dynasty wide receiver 1. And yeah, I hear you on Jefferson and the track record. I think it's difficult to argue with the track record, but I mean, Jefferson's wide receiver 6 on a per game basis on the season. Nabers wide receiver 2 on a per game basis, and that's with AJ Brown being wide receiver 1, only playing a couple of games. So I think that there's some context there. And that's why I lean towards having Nabers the number 1 guy already, just because the production has been there. It's not speculating on what the production could be. It's not anything like that. It's when a guy comes out over the first 4 games of his career is the wide receiver 1 in fantasy with this kind of draft capital, this kind of game, everything attached to him, and there is a significant age difference. That is enough to make him the dynasty wide receiver 1 for me.
So Herms, why do you hate Malik Nabers? You've ranked him 4. Clearly you think he's a terrible player.
Yeah, I mean, you said it best. I think he's just dreadful. There's no positive upside at all. For me, I think it's important to reward players for doing stuff for long periods of time. So that's kind of just where it is for me. Like, I'm just not comfortable. Like Jeff said, like a 4-game sample to open the season and being literally number 1 is not some small feat. And I don't want to minimize that because, like, Malik Nabers is that dude for sure. But we have guys ahead that we've seen do it multiple years in a row, stuff like that. They're also still very young assets themselves. So I'm just a little bit hesitant to do it. It's really just kind of a pick your preference type thing. But I certainly don't begrudge anybody who's going to make the argument that Malik Nabers could be number 1.
Yeah. And guys, Jamar Chase, turns out he's pretty good. Remember that week where he wasn't? It's wild. It's I think he's an all right player. Again, this tier is silly. I think the top, weirdly enough, Amon-Ra St. Brown's the only one I don't think should be top 4, or the top 1. All the rest of the ones above him, you could argue as the number 1 overall wide receiver, and I'm not gonna like fight you like some people would on the internet when they see that, like, Malik Nabers 4, you're the biggest idiot of all time. How dare you put Justin Jefferson up there even though he does the same thing week in, week out. All right.
And I guess that's a lot of it. The way that people talk about Justin Jefferson, you would think he's the wide receiver 1 with a bullet, that there's separation there, and it's not. I mean, there's a group of players that are scoring very similarly. Yep. I just happen to rank the youngest one number 1 out of the group.
Let's put it this way. If I walk out with any 4 of these wide receivers in a dynasty, I'm like, sorry, Joe. Heck yes.
Here we go. We're starting it out.
Oh yeah, I've gotten pretty bad here lately. No one tell on me.
Secret safe with me.
Tier 2, Nico Collins, definitely making a jump since the last time we've done this. AJ Brown, Drake London, Marvin Harrison Jr. making a fall. Not really. I mean, he's just more that these other guys are pretty good and still young. And then Garrett Wilson at the bottom of tier 2, which is funny, seeing as Jeff said, remember he sucked too in points per game. He's the wide receiver 6. This is another tier. Let's say if I came out of a draft with 2 QBs and for super flex and I get one of these guys as my top wide receiver, I've won the draft, baby. Give me the pennant. I'm going to feel so good until week 3 when I realize I've made a mistake with my running backs. So, I mean, this is a slam dunk here. With that being said, with Marvin Harrison Jr., I know he had a concussion. I think there's always going to be the worry with Kyler Murray because even though he's great for fantasy, I don't think that he is elite as far as NFL terms, and that could limit a wide receiver. Do we think that this is permanent? Or do you think it's kind of like, again, just a fluky couple of weeks and this is a rookie wide receiver working his way in? Herms, we'll start with you. Marvin Harrison Jr., why do you hate him besides the fact that he's young? I'm just
because he stinks. No. the really frustrating thing with Marvin Harrison Jr. is that like the entire Cardinals offense kind of has to grow together, because something that I think people forget is that this is Kyler Murray's first full season in this new offense. They, he missing all that time last year with that ACL. Like, there's still some catching up to speed and doing all that stuff that he has to do. And, to the point that was made earlier, Marvin Harrison Jr. himself getting concussed already, missing time. There's an element of getting into a groove that they're just going to have to do as a collective unit over the course of time. And that's not something that is going to make me nervous about the son of a Hall of Famer who plays just like a taller version of his dad, basically. So, the first month or so is not going to dissuade me from what I really thought about before. But, I mean, there have been certain alarming things, but to kind of drive that point home again, it's the Cardinals still have to grow together. It's still a new thing. Everybody's still trying to figure it out together. So I'm kind of just, I haven't moved that much on my opinion or stance.
Yeah, and I'm assuming, like Jeff, you agree. And then someone that I think he was just outside of this tier, or maybe he was on the bubble, was Drake London, and it's more that we didn't know because we hadn't seen it yet, and now we've seen it, and he's the player that we thought he was. Again, there was a whole week where we thought Drake London and Garrett Wilson were bad players. It was a dark time in my life. I'm not really concerned, and I feel pretty good about all the players in this tier. Is there anyone that you'd want to sell here, Jeff, at this point? Or do you think that's overranked, or wide receiver just feels as steady as any position ever, I think?
Yeah, I would say so too. I think my concerns on Marvin Harrison Jr. mainly is the limited role within the offensive scheme, where they're keeping him more as a deep to intermediate type player. And that maybe either speaks to the development that Harrison Jr. needs to do in his game to become more of a well-rounded player, creative after the catch, getting those cheap yards, those types of things that really help bump up that volume into the elite level tier, or it's just scheme and he's going to be stuck in that. And that's kind of the game that overall that I think we're playing right now on any concerns with him, because obviously we've seen him show up on an NFL field. He's an excellent receiver. We've seen the big performance week 2 now that feels like 18 years ago, but that was only a month ago. But yeah, I think that we did see that. And so that kind of quelled some of the concerns. But again, I think the biggest difference between why I have Malik Nabers as my wide receiver 1 and I've got Marvin Harrison Jr. as my wide receiver 7 is Nabers has shown the ability to impact all areas of the field, all areas of the passing attack, and to be able to be schemed in any sort of role. We haven't seen that yet from Harrison Jr.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I know that I'm going to have a little more, like I've told you this, I keep saying this show, a little more conviction and scouting. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a little lazy on certain routes. He doesn't have quite the whip in and out of it. And I think that's something that he just needs to work through. I also am concerned that he just didn't play football for a whole summer, it felt like. And I feel like that's a slow start because he held out from so many things in the offseason. And then I know I think it was the last rookie to sign his contract. I don't know what's going on, but when players aren't in the building for any amount of time, even if it's on a different team, it's just not good historically. And it comes up with a slow start. We look at Brandon Aiyuk. I know the injury is a big thing with Brandon Aiyuk, but I think the main problem why he started slow is he just didn't play football for 6 weeks when everyone else was. And it's when you're in a very well-oiled machine like the 49ers, or I'm sure that, Jonathan Gannon coming from a similar system, like he wants to emulate with the Cardinals, it's difficult. We'll move on to tier 3, but before we do that, we're going to pay some bills. If you like content like this, guys, hit the like and subscribe button. It helps feed my cat. It keeps shoes on Jeff's kids' feet, and it helps us afford to not pay guests like Herms. We also have a fun website. We have all kinds of content on there. I got a mock draft coming out this week. I'm on the rookie beat, the 2025 rookie beat. Jeff manages a lot of our Dynasty content. We got new tools coming for you all the time. Go to footballguys.com/plans today to get signed up, and you can get even personalized custom info questions from people like me and Jeff if you're into that. All right, that's done now. And we're going to go into tier 3. This is a small tier, and it just kind of how it worked out and kind of how it feels. It's Jayden Reed. I feel like he could easily be in a tier 2. I'm still hesitant to lump him in with some of those other guys. I know that's crazy. And I know he's played really well. I'm not ready. Puka, I've struggled to rank Puka since he's come into the league because I know who he is as a player, but I also know the situation the team he's on. Herms, we'll start with you. Jayden Reed, do you think he deserves to be with, let's say, the secondary elite tier 2 people, or am I being a hater? Where did you have him ranked at? You have him at 12, so I guess I'm the hater. Technically, it's me.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I mean, dude, Jayden Reed is the guy. He's even better than I thought he would be. I remember when he was coming in, the scouting process that I went through on that receiver class, I didn't have a ton of conviction behind it, but like the comp that I gave to him was he reminded me of everything that I wanted Diontae Johnson to be. Just as I dreamed him in my head as a Steelers fan, and then he just turned around and did everything and more. And this Packers offense is just so good, and Jordan Love executes it so well that I just believe so much in that connection between the two of them as this thing continues to evolve down the road that I'm just fully here for it.
Yeah, my comp was Emmanuel Sanders from him, for him from a little bit, and he's definitely better than that. One, the athleticism. I feel like he's just gotten faster. I don't remember him being as fast on tape as he is now. I know that he was just kind of buried over there in Michigan State. Jeff, Jayden Reed, obviously you're the highest on him, so you definitely think he belongs in that tier 2 category.
Yeah, I mean, wide receiver 7 on the season. Here in his second season, we've seen him be an impact player. He's got the quarterback pairing that you would love to see. He's got an open, I mean, for the lack of having a true wide receiver 1, seems like he is maybe the true wide receiver 1 for this Packers organization. He was injured this past week 7, so he had a quieter game that week. So I mean, that plays into it. But yeah, you've seen the production so far this season. Immediately being a top 12 dynasty option is easily, in my mind, when you got a year 2 wide receiver, that's a top 12 option in redraft.
Yeah. I agree 1,000%. And a lot of it is I just like certain archetypes better, but I'm probably just being a little bit of a hater there. And I did kind of copy and paste over from the website. Puka Nacua, Jeff, you have him ranked the same as me, 15. And that I do feel really confident on. And what I mean by confident is I found it really easy to keep putting people ahead of them because I genuinely think that everyone ahead of him on this current tier list is a more talented player. And moreover, I think they have a better situation long term. I know, like, we love Sean McVay, but I almost put Matt Stafford on the fallers list because like, what are we doing with Matt Stafford since the Rams aren't doing anything and we don't really get the production to be a win now team. So I'm curious to where you have them so highly, Herms at 11. Is it just because we got that? I mean, we literally got a record breaking year, so I can kind of see your processes. And from what you've said is he's done it. He did it for a full season. You have that full sample size.
Yeah, and I have no reason to believe that Sean McVay can't figure out a way to make it work with some other decent quarterback. Like there's something about his track record specifically, not even just, I mean, obviously Puka Nacua, historic year. The, McVay himself is just a wizard at figuring these things out. So the long-term ambiguity of who's going to be a quarterback, maybe the reality just hasn't set in on me yet. Maybe I'm just not thinking about it as much as I should be. But yeah, I mean, somebody who's going to go out there and set the rookie record for, dang near every category is somebody that I'm going to trust. And plus this year, his worst crime is getting hurt. And I try really hard not to penalize players for that. I think that would be something that I'd really like to hammer home about him as well.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And that's another reason why I struggled. It's like I know that he deserves to be in top 12 conversation, but at the same time, there's guys that are producing, and it's not just flash in the pans. It's just like again, Jayden Reed making the leap that he has this year. I didn't expect that. I told people that Jayden Reed's probably a sell, not because I didn't like him, but Jayden Reed might have been at a ceiling for usage. I didn't expect him. Like again, we keep hearing the Antonio Brown comps. It's hard to hate on it for the way that they use him in this style of play. So it's crazy that I picked the wrong Steelers wide receiver to compare him to when I compared him to Emmanuel Sanders. So that ends it for tier 3, short and sweet. Go ahead, Jeff.
On Puka Nacua, there was a story that the Rams were trying very hard to move up to get Brock Bowers in the draft, which is interesting. And you talk about McVay developing the next quarter. Is McVay going to be there? Because there's been a lot of talk maybe about retirement for Sean McVay and kind of moving into a cushy job in the booth. I just think there's some questions around Puka Nacua and what happens. Cooper Kupp, if comes back healthy week 8, reestablishes himself given what we saw from week 1. If that happens and Puka Nacua comes back and kind of gets eased back in, what happens to the value? That I just have a lot of questions probably long term. And I understand the production that we saw year 1 out of Puka Nacua. I would be surprised if Sean McVay stays there and Matthew Stafford doesn't leave, because Matthew Stafford is a free agent at the end of the year, and there's been a little bit of sticking point potentially on money there, but that's another avenue. But if Stafford and McVay are there, I would be surprised if they don't go out and address the wide receiver position in a meaningful way in the draft. They were really excited about Demarcus Robinson as that wide receiver 3. That turns out he's Demarcus Robinson, and Tutu Atwell's given them some production. Jordan Whittington has had moments, but 3 wide receivers in that set is so important that I think that they're going to do something meaningful there.
Sean McVay seems like a weird guy. He's one of the youngest coaches ever. He's like, I want to retire. I don't. Maybe he's smarter than I am, where he's just like, I've made a lot of money and I just don't want to work that hard anymore. And maybe that's just the way to go.
I think there's something to be said for these guys that can make, well, Tom Brady's making $300 million, but there's something to be said for these guys that can work a couple hours on a Sunday morning and that's it, and make multiple millions of dollars doing it and sitting in a TV studio to talk about football. I mean, it's not a bad life.
Yeah. I guess I'm just too arrogant. I couldn't do it. I'd have to win like one more ring to say that like I'm one of the best before I'd quit. But again, I'm probably a psychopath. Moving on to tier 4, my therapy aside, we got Chris Olave, Brian Thomas Jr., Rashee Rice, Zay Flowers, D.J Moore, DeVonta Smith, T. Higgins, Rome Odunze, Brandon Aiyuk, and D.K Metcalf. We've talked a lot about Chris Olave. I like him. I think he's a talented player. Herms. Actually, we'll start somewhere else. Rashee Rice. I will start with Jeff here with Rashee Rice. I've recently called Rashee Rice, or I've called Juju Smith-Schuster Rashee Rice Sr. Do you think that hurts Rashee Rice's dynasty value when people see that he's more of a product of a system than he is a singular talent?
No, I mean, I don't. I think it's a pretty damn good system to be a product of. I mean, Patrick Mahomes and kind of you're essentially the feature portion of a Patrick Mahomes offense that's pretty solid for me. I don't know. I know that this is something that we frequently disagree on, but do I think anything's going to change there? Not really meaningfully. I mean, certainly the injury clouds the situation, the potential suspension clouds the situation, but I mean, Rashee Rice was a top 5 fantasy option when he was not injured, playing with Patrick Mahomes there. And the system is what the system is. I think every single player is a system player to some extent.
That's fair. And that's just me asking the tough questions, Jeff. I have to. But again, from where I've ranked him at, it's hard for me to not want. I probably should have him ahead of Chris Olave, but I just know that a quarterback is immediately going to make Chris Olave like a top 10 player. And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't believe it at all because everything says Chris Olave is a pretty good
Rashee
player.
Rice has a quarterback and he's top 10 player. So there you go.
Okay. That's fair. But like Herms, you agree with me here. I mean, like you're lower than I am actually. You have him at 21, but you're also a reverse ageist. You hate the youngins. You're all about, you date older people. So
I think that there is something to be said about guys who have been out there and that have been doing it. I think it's important that we reward these veterans with lifetime achievement awards in our rankings.
Yeah. I know that right now AJ Brown is like he's gonna go on. He's like Herms has me.
Exactly, dude.
But now I'm gonna go to the tough question. Back to you, Herms. Brian Thomas Jr. And now that I've answered it, it's because I was like, what? Herms, we've been preaching the gospel here at Football Guys about Brian Thomas Jr. and you're gonna sully his name on our show here. I almost had to boot you, but it was too late booking. So, what's up, bro?
Dude, I think he's great. I don't want to take anything away from Brian Thomas Jr., but for full transparency for the listeners, I put Brian Thomas Jr. at 25. So if you want to yell at me, you can yell at me at ch_Herms on Twitter. That is just a product of I have zero clue what we are going to see out of the 2025 Jacksonville Jaguars in terms of who is coaching, who is the offensive coordinator, who's going to be around. Kind of like we were talking about a little bit before about how it's a little bit ambiguous with Sean McVay. I don't really see how Doug Peterson finishes the year as the coach with how poorly a lot of these things have gone. There's just so much up in the air there that I'm completely scared off by it entirely. That, and we also really haven't seen, outside of a handful of moments over the last couple of years, the prince that we were promised in Trevor Lawrence being this transcendent, oh, he's the best quarterback to come into the league since Peyton Manning or Andrew Luck. And it's like, well, he's good. He may not be great, but he is good. And I'm just a little bit weird. The entire what's going on in Jacksonville just gives me the creeps. That's really all it is. It's not an indictment on the guy. It's just everything else, kind of.
Him being a Jaguar it's a fair caveat. It's a fair caveat. Because I'm worried that they're going to fire Doug Peterson. They're going to do something silly like hire Bill Belichick.
Mm-hmm. You never know.
It feels like
hired Urban Meyer, dude. They could do anything.
Yeah. Shad Khan has that face of someone who would fall for that. He's just like, well, Bill Belichick sounds like he knows what he's talking about on Underdog Fantasy.
Herms, somebody comes to you and says, I've got this 26-year-old Brandon Aiyuk fresh off of a season-ending injury that's going to be 27 before he steps on the field again, that has not done anything this year. I'm going to trade him straight up for your Brian Thomas Jr. What are you saying to that?
Okay, I mean, I don't know if I'm doing that. I mean, well, okay, I see your point. I see your point. I see where we're going with this. I am being too harsh. I will admit this. This is a me thing. Listeners, this is totally a me thing.
This is what we do here. We bring guests on, we berate them for their takes, and then we give them therapy.
Only if they're very, very dear friends.
Oh yeah, very dear friend. Like Herms is cool. He could take it. And I love Jeff's little Socratic method to get Herms to come to Jesus on his own.
It's fair. It's fair. It works. Very effective.
This is the new on the couch. This is
Yeah.
Jagger and Jeff break your mind time.
I watched him do it. I was watching the sheet, and I was just like, "No, Herms, don't do it."
I feel
All
bad
right.
now.
It's okay. It's okay. T. Higgins. Speaking of Brian Thomas Jr.'s, T. Higgins. He was Brian Thomas Jr. before it was cool, and he's slower. But he's still pretty good. Apparently, when he's on the field, he plays. Moreover, he could get a new team. Guys, if you have some T. Higgins trades, if you have some T. Higgins movements in your league, pop those in the chat. Even if you guys are over there on Apple or Spotify, leave us 5 stars and tell us what's going on with T. Higgins, because he's routinely weird to rank. And tier 4 is like, here's guys that we know are pretty good, but they got some kind of stank on them. Like Zay Flowers is, people just don't love him because he's small, I guess. D.J Moore is a bear. DeVonta Smith's a wide receiver 2. T. Higgins is a 2. Brandon Aiyuk doesn't have a knee. D.K Metcalf, what's always going with that guy? But T. Higgins now is someone that you should be buying, but people just seem not to, because he's always injured. Jeff, do you think that's the reason why, or are we slow?
I mean, I think people are concerned about his historical placement next to Ja'Marr Chase and kind of feeling like they're buying a wide receiver 2. And people, I think, traditionally had valued him as a wide receiver 1 in your dynasty top 12 status for the most part over the last couple of years. And so there's always been some trepidation there. But since he's been back, he's out targeted Ja'Marr Chase every week for the last 4 weeks, and on the season since week 3, since he returned, he's out targeted. I mean, he's been wide receiver 13 in half PPR. He's right there on the cusp of being a top 12 wide receiver 1 in fantasy. You're getting everything that you would want from him. And, you know, if you are concerned about that status next to Ja'Marr Chase, he probably is not going to have that status next year. He's probably going to be a wide receiver 1 somewhere. And so that's a boon potentially there. And I don't know. T. Higgins is somebody that I've always been higher than consensus on, because I think he's a good player. He's I understand arguments to the both sides and concerns about playing next to Chase, and he didn't get to hang out in college with Joe Burrow the way that Ja'Marr Chase did, so maybe that's a concern. But no, T. Higgins has definitely given us spike weeks. He's given us overall production when he has been healthy, and he's doing it again this year.
Mm-hmm. Herms, DeVonta Smith, is he going to constantly be stuck in this tier? And he seems like a perennial buy because he has his own value. He can give you wide receiver 1 weeks, but in Dynasty, it's hard to move him higher because you have the A.J. Brown problem, and they're both under contract for a long time. Arguably, I think he could be one of the biggest buys and easily gettable wide receivers in this tier. Would you agree?
I would say so. I think it's very generally true of this entire tier, kind of to your point. Like we've reached the point where we're talking about players that, you know, to borrow your phrase, have a little stank on them for one reason or another. And I think it also, to further justify my Brian Thomas Jr., if I may, look, in a world where the offense works, okay, like Evan Ingram gets a lot of targets, Christian Kirk normally works, and we're talking about, like, you know, with him and even with T. Higgins and, you know, some of these guys like that, like higher A-dot players that, you know, kind of need bigger things downfield to happen. And, you know, like, I don't know. But back to DeVonta Smith, because that's what you actually asked me about. Yeah, dude, it's annoying that A.J. Brown is around, but it also still works. And also, every time A.J. Brown has been out, DeVonta Smith turns out to just elevate and be even better than he already was before. So you take guys like that. You always take chances like that, especially because there's enough of an age disparity between the proverbial problem ahead of them that eventually, or at least theoretically, it will go away. There is room for them to ascend to that aspirational spot eventually, if you're just willing to give it the patience of time.
Yeah. More of the story, guys. If a player is objectively talented, you probably won't regret it in the long run buying those players. There'll be times where you're going to feel bad. Like, again, why say I'm stupid and I'll keep buying Chris Olave? I feel bad, like a little bit, but I know that deep down, maybe he'll have the D.J Moore resurgence and I'll be disappointed again a different way. So,
Oh, very true. Very true.
oh man. We'll move on to tier 5. Now we have it seems like all boom blessed players. I love how it works out and how like naturally everyone's mind kind of works the same way. Tier 5, we have Jameson Williams, George Pickens, Tyreek Hill, Jaylen Waddle, Xavier Worthy, Terry McLaurin, Keon Coleman, and Chris Godwin. The big one here is Jameson Williams is a fun one. So is George Pickens. We've got some olds, Tyreek Hill, Terry McLaurin. Chris Godwin kind of sticks out to me because he's having a great year, but is it like the Buccaneers in general just difficult to rank at this point, Jeff?
I mean, that might be the case, or it might be concern about what it looks like in the future. I don't know. I mean, maybe it was from last year having Chris Godwin being somewhat disappointing with the injury and then viewed as a disappointing player last year, even though kind of a lot of the underlying production numbers were still there. It just, we didn't get the touchdowns that we wanted, but I don't know. I think it's just one of those that you already feel like you've seen the best days of Chris Godwin. You feel like he's not the number one receiver next to Mike Evans, and some portion of your mind feels that way, especially with Baker Mayfield and the fantasy production that you saw last year. I think that there are just a multitude of factors of things that serve to hold back Chris Godwin.
Yeah, it makes sense. And he's hot right now. And to be honest, compared to where he's ranked at, he's the ultimate buy for contenders. I just lost Brandon Aiyuk, so I'm like, well, I guess do I sell Brandon Aiyuk to go get Chris Godwin? I mean, and that's only if I'm not going against another contender who has Chris Godwin and wants to keep him. But if anything on this list, he's the biggest buy on here. Back to you, Herms. We got your boy George Pickens. Is this the actual breakout now that we have Mr. Unlimited, the opposite of Jared from Subway? He's wholesome. He's just a man of God. So George Pickens. I'm sorry, guys.
Jared's
just an insane comparison.
That's where we are.
I'm sorry, guys. I went there. I'm sorry, Joe. I'm sorry, everybody. My mom, but George Pickens. George Pickens. Is this the breakout? Is he right now? He's tier 5, but realistically, if we see more of what we saw from last game, we could be thinking of tier 2, tier 1. No, let's just say tier 2.
Yeah, tier 1, very aggressive. I would love to see us get there because that means Steelers are really good, and that just makes me super happy. But I think it's possible. The things that really concern me are that it was only the 1 game sample, and also there were a few throws Russ definitely got a little lucky on that had very kind of low percentage of being caught to begin with. But maybe we could also just give that as credit to George Pickens for always doing the most level, impossible stuff constantly to come down with every pass that comes his direction. But Arthur Smith doing that kind of weird thing of only having him out there for like 70-ish, 80-ish% of the routes and stuff is kind of annoying. The whole offense is still trying to be figured out at some point. I'm just trying to be cautious because I don't want to get too caught up in my Steelers fandom bleeding into my sense of being able to analyze stuff. Because if it were purely based off of just like my vibes and my heart, George Pickens is absolutely that tier 2 guy. I just have to really, really see it for an extended period before I go too overboard.
Yeah. Jeff, are you as happy as Herms, or are you a little bit more calm since you're not a Steelers fan?
I mean, I've got George Pickens as wide receiver 18, so I guess I'm leading everybody on that rank. So that tells you I'm very optimistic about what we've seen from Pickens. He's even overcome the Arthur Smith offense, so that's big. But I think it's one thing when you have Desmond Ridder missing Drake London downfield by 15 yards versus Russell Wilson actually hitting George Pickens downfield. So that's a big key differentiator there. But I think when you look at everything, you stack it up. I know the Steelers have been active in trade conversations to bring in another wide receiver, and maybe they get that done, and that might make me a little bit more concerned. But right now, there's no reason why Pickens should not be seeing 10 targets plus per game in that offense relative to the other talent around him.
Do you guys, I mean, Diontae Johnson's available. Yeah.
I know. Trust me.
Well,
They had like
figured Mike Williams was just getting on a different plane like after yesterday, but not there yet.
You have, if you get Mike Williams, you have George Pickens, and then you have bizarro worse George Pickens. It's just you had the perfect setup when you had Diontae Johnson and George Pickens together. You have like your big downfield guy, pure X, and you have like a good Z slot in Diontae Johnson. But here we are, alas, the marriage didn't work. Anyway, moving on to tier 6. In this tier, we have it's starting to get weird. I guess that's the best way to say it. It's starting to get weird here, where you can go anywhere. Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Khalil Shakir, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, Michael Pittman, Diontae Johnson. That's hard to rank because I feel like he doesn't belong in the weird tier, but I can't put him above anyone else. Then you have Ladd McConkey, who I don't expect to stay there next season. Let's start with you, Jeff, with Khalil Shakir. Do you think he's still fine now that Cooper Kupp's in town? Are you concerned? Are there alarm bells? What do you think the pecking order is now?
Amari Cooper. So I'm fine with it, to be honest. I think Amari Cooper, and I made the analogy in my Monday article that I write. I'm big on Bucky Brooks' belief of you're building a basketball team with the wide receiver core.
Yeah.
And I think that when you're looking at having Shakir, having Dalton Kincaid, having Keon Coleman, you've got a lot of guys that are maybe like really good point guard in Shakir, and maybe, and Keon Coleman can stand in the corner and hit threes, and Dalton Kincaid can be a stretch four or something like that. But when you don't have a guy that can be that 20 point per game scorer nightly, the defense is just viewing all of those pieces differently, and it makes it so much more difficult for them to do their individual jobs. But when you put that guy in that, okay, this guy's got us, this guy's going to be our, Anthony Edwards is like too high of a comp for Amari Cooper, but like a solid player that can be your centerpiece as your wide receiver one, who is used to seeing wide receiver one coverage through the extent of his career, that shifts how every single other player in the tree is viewed by the defense, and how they're covered by the defense, and what they're going up against. And I think that there's a lot of context that is involved in the way that the Bills season has kind of shaped out, where week 2, they only ran like 45 offensive plays, because that was the game that Tua Tagovailoa got hurt. And basically both the Bills and Dolphins were just ready to end the game when that happened. They would have walked off the field if the league would have let him, I feel like. And then going into week 3, they got behind by a lot against Baltimore. I think that was the Baltimore blowout game, or it was around there. So that was another one where it was like just kind of weird. No, week 3 was the Jaguars game where they were up by a ton at halftime, and they were just cooking on the Jaguars. In the second half, they didn't do anything. Week 4 was the Baltimore game when they were losing by a lot and nothing could get rolling. And so you've just got a lot of different things that have played into diminished lower passing numbers overall for the Bills offense, that I think in a normal game script what we saw this past week, where kind of everybody got some against the Titans defense.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we always say that here, and I love Bucky Brooks, Daniel Jeremiah, you're building a basketball team and who can score. And I think in most cases, especially with players like Khalil Shakir, for fantasy, he's still going to be productive for you. But it honestly helps him out having someone like Amari Cooper, because you're not just keying on someone like Khalil Shakir. Again, I love Shakir, but he's not Justin Jefferson where you can be like, go out there and be somebody and, we'll be okay. He's just not a guy you can do that with. So, Herms, Michael Pittman, Jeff, known hater, me, reformed lover. I'm now neutral. I'm asexual to Michael Pittman as far as fantasy analysis. I think he is a wide receiver in the NFL who catches passes and is okay at his cost. How are you valuing him with players that we think of sells and buys and holds? Michael Pittman, I wish he almost didn't exist. Like, I just wish he wasn't there. Like, I'm upset that I have to think about him because I don't want to hold him. I don't want to sell him and I don't want to buy him. He's like, I talk about a Lou who helps us out in our Discord. Shout out to Lou. He gave me a phrase like Schrodinger's trade player, where it's like he's whatever he is, whatever you open it, but he's like the opposite of that, where he's like Pandora's player. That as soon as he became a thing, it's a problem.
Yeah, he's weird, man, especially because we've now seen in splits over the last couple seasons, like what happens when a more conventional quarterback is under center and what happens when Anthony Richardson is under center, because we are talking about a very severe like Jekyll and Hyde situation, because if there's not the right type of quarterback throwing to Michael Pittman Jr., he disappears like the Avatar when the world needs him most. And it's just the most annoying thing in the world. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, why did I even spend this pick in the first place? Why did I trade for him? I'm terrible at this. Am I terrible at this? Should I quit all my leagues? And then it just spirals and it becomes very just emotionally draining. And that's the last thing you want to get out of playing a hobby for fun with your friends, sometimes for money, but mostly just for fun. That's not what we do this for. And Michael Pittman does that to me. It hurts. But I try not to think about him either. I'm kind of with you where I'm like, yep, he's around and I don't want anything to do with it because frankly, it's too hard to figure out and I just don't have the energy left.
Yeah, and as someone, I have a lot of them rostered. I'm like, I give fair deals, and people are just like, I'm good, you know.
Yep.
Yeah. He's the old dollar store version of Drake London. Basically, he's Drake London with all the shine rubbed off.
Yeah. I will say those dollar store knockoff Girl Scout cookies, they smack. Like, if you don't got them year round, go to the Dollar General and they make these Clover Valley BS Girl Scout cookies, and there's probably cancer in them, but they're pretty tasty.
We've already mentioned Jared from Subway on this episode. I don't think that we should marry Jared from Subway with Girl Scout cookies, like in any sort of way.
Oh my God.
Oh, good God.
We're gonna get canceled. Tier 7. We're having too much fun here, folks. If you've made it this far, you are a dedicated listener. And we appreciate your patronage here at Football Guys Dynasty Show. Tier 7. Yeah, exactly. Tank Dell. He's in the shadow realm, guys. Tank Dell, Jordan Addison, Josh Downs, Davante Adams, Stefon Diggs, Mike Evans. This is the shadow realm, meaning a lot of people call it the dead zone. I call it the shadow realm here. Besides Josh Downs, maybe Jordan Addison, the wide receivers here are rentals. I don't even know if Davante Adams is good. The Jets are a terrible team, so I don't even know how that's going to go in the future. Mike Evans is old. Stefon Diggs, that's someone I think is a good rental. Like, that is someone I know if I go and get Stefon Diggs, I'm buying a mercenary that is going to help me this year. And then whatever happens after this season. But I apologize to you guys. I've led you astray. Tank Dell is, I don't know if he's dead long term, but he is dead right now. Herms, where are you at here? Jeff gives me this singular face every week when I suggest Tank Dell. It's not good. So where are you at?
I think it's so difficult. I want him to be a thing because he's small and his name is Tank. Of course we root for things like this. It's tremendous. It's wonderful. But yeah, he kind of hasn't done too much and it's beginning to look a little bit late early. And I was a little bit skeptical to begin with because I think a lot of his hype was predicated on if we're going to be really honest with ourselves, about half a season of production last year. Because even before he broke his leg, he really only kind of went off about like half the time, and otherwise he was kind of useless. So I feel like he was kind of like artificially inflated value-wise anyway. So this is kind of just like, well, if it isn't the consequences of your own ranking actions of just Tank Dell coming back down to earth. Like, that's truly how I feel about it. Like, it's cool that he is good sometimes. I wish he could do it more often, but the fact is he just might not.
Do you agree with that, Jeff?
So I missed the start sit show this past week. I had family obligations. 2 weeks ago when we did the start sit show, I pontificated and gave this whole, prove me wrong, Tank Dell, I'm not putting you in my lineup. I want to see it and blah, blah, blah. And he goes off and catches a touchdown and he's like a top 20 wide receiver play on the week. And I'm the idiot. And then this past week, I don't get to come in and say, oh, maybe I was wrong, or whatever. And he goes out and puts a 0. So, I guess I can keep my track record of prove me wrong, Tank Dell, before I'm going to do it.
Well, it's just the things that he's good at, he's just not doing. There's never drop problems with Tank Dell. That was not in his profile. Just, you would think that him and CJ Stroud ride tandem bicycles from how they talk. They ride tandem bicycles to practice, and there's a connection problem between them. It's weird. I don't understand it, and I'm tired of defending it. So it's to the shadow realm until further notice. Like, it's what we got to do, guys. Is he a buy for contenders? Yeah, at the right price. If I can get Tank Dell for a second, I'll buy Tank Dell. But if you're asking a first for Tank Dell, I can't do that in this economy. I cannot do that in this economy. Josh Downs, shadow realm until Anthony Richardson is either done developing or he's whatever. It's developmental year for Anthony Richardson, and I've told you that, and I'm going to stand by it. Josh Downs, shadow realm until he goes further.
Real quick on Tank Dell, and Stefon Diggs, I guess, is in this tier as well. Stefon Diggs redid his contract, so he's basically playing on a 1-year deal, a free agent after this year. Do you think that he's back in Houston, or do you think that this is Houston kind of going in and recognizing the money that they've committed to Nico Collins and biting the bullet on a 1-year deal with Diggs, with Dell back as the option there? Because, Stefon Diggs to me seems like the type of guy that is certainly going to explore the market and see what Stefon Diggs can get paid on the market. But maybe he is at that point of his career where he's happy in Houston, because that is kind of, I think it's easy to tell the story on Tank Dell to say, well, he was hurt, now Diggs is gone, and it's got to be Dell again. I think there's a potential rebound of value there.
I will, and that's why I think he's a buy at the right price if you're willing, if like a good risk at price. But I think that they'd be foolish to pay him too much money when you could, with the usage that you're getting out of Stefon Diggs right now, the way they're using him, why not go get Xavier Restrepo in the second, maybe Deion Burks from Oklahoma? Just if you're going to get this like underneath guy and you have your Nico Collins to stretch stuff out, and then wherever Tank Dell is in there, you can go get that. That's the one thing this draft has, is these types of players. Go draft the guy that you can have for 4 years, because eventually you have guys that are going to need to be paid, like CJ Stroud and Will Anderson and what for. So I'm not really baking Stefon Diggs into my rankings going forward, and that's why he's in the shadow realm. If he was on a 2-year deal, legitimately, I would probably put Stefon Diggs in tier 5, like 2 tiers higher. But because he's on that 1-year deal, where am I going to put him? Herms, you got anything on Diggs before we wrap it up?
I like where your head's at, and I think it would be really cool if he comes back. But, I think it's really just going to come down to how successful Houston is, and that will remain to be seen. Hey, there you go.
Yeah. Thanks. Short and sweet. Even though this episode was longer than normal, but we had fun, arguably too much fun here. That's it for us. We have one more with Herms here. We're going to go over our Dynasty trade show. It's me, your professional nerd, and then that's our Dynasty captain, Jeff Bell, and you'll see Herms on the next one. Love you guys. Adios. That's Alfredo's catchphrase.